Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I just want to quilt. All right, so we're going to start with the first thing. Let's first do a quick sound check to make sure all is good.
Okay. What do you need me to say?
That's pretty much all I need you to say. Hold on. Let's get some email.
Oh, yeah.
Where's that one? Cool. So, we're going to start with the first question for preservation purposes. Tell me your name and where you're calling from.
My name is Ruth Kitchin Tillman, and I am calling from State College, Pennsylvania.
Cool. And what's your first memory of someone quilting or sewing?
I think my first memory is actually of my mother doing embroidery type work. She did beading patterns. When I was little, she worked on a Christmas tree skirt and some wall hangings. But she couldn't sew very well. So I do remember her repairing pillowcases with my grandmother's sewing machine that she left us. Uh-huh. But I learned to sew because I had wanted to make a dress for my cousin's wedding because I wanted a dress in the store and it was too small. It was a kid's dress. And so I was about 13 and she bought me a pattern and fabric and said, I can't teach you how to sew. Uh-huh. So follow the instructions.
Follow the instructions. So how did it go?
I look back and it wasn't that bad. There's a lot of things I would have done differently. But I was really happy at the time. I was really proud of myself.
That's really cool. Did you finish it?
Yeah, I finished it and I wore it to his wedding.
You did? That is remarkable. How old were you?
13.
Wow. 13's awesome. That's a great age. You can take on the world, right?
Yeah, it was very creative and it was a fun new thing to experiment with.
That's very cool. And so when did you start quilting?
I started quilting when I was 15. I don't actually remember the impetus for it, except I remember getting the Quilting for Dummies book from the library and talking my mom into buying me materials and stuff. She didn't buy me a lot of sewing supplies. I mostly had to buy my own. I had some odd jobs as a teen. But I remember she bought me these and again, just sort of said, go to it.
That's really
So I did that all by hand.
You did it all by hand?
Yeah. I pretty much have always quilted by hand until the last 5 years or so.
Yeah. And what made you switch?
I think mostly time.
Yeah.
Especially, time and money. I guess when I was younger, like when I was in college, I made quilts for at least half my roommates for their beds.
That's like
bed-sized quilts.
That's amazing.
They were the size to fit a college dorm bed, and I would do it all the time. I like to have something to do with my hands. I was the girl sitting in the back of your class, like quilting or piecing quilts.
You did it while you were in class. I love it. And
okay, speaking of copyright, and I'm only admitting to certain things, but I was in the era of course, when people would throw up a file server on campus and it might have interesting things to watch on it.
Right.
So, after we finished our homework, my roommates and I, we just put stuff on the computer for hours and just watched hours of, I don't know, things that people put on files.
And tell me the time periods, because we're doing this for preservation purposes. So you're talking, what years are you in college?
That would be the mid-aughts. So the 2003, 2007 era.
So you're still like at the end of the Napster era, right? Would you say that? Like Grokster comes out in 2005. Are you there? Did I lose you? Oh, did I lose you? I think I lost you. Can you hear me?
Flex.
Okay. So we lost you for just a second.
Oh, sorry.
So you're like you're a Napster baby? You're like high school?
Yes.
And then Grokster happens, which is the last of those cases in 2005. So you guys are you're the illegal downloading generation. Would that be correct to say?
Essentially.
Yeah. You kind of embrace it and
I want to know
it's a badge of honor, right?
Yeah, I mean, we all went to Netflix. Like, I have a Netflix subscription
Yeah,
now, and I
I
have
know.
an Amazon Prime subscription.
Right. You got older. Got more
Yeah.
legal, right? Yeah.
But it was essentially binge watching before you could do
That's
that.
right. That's right. And
And
for
so
people
I
like,
would hand quilt.
yeah. So for people to understand, so there was a time before iTunes and Netflix where there was kind of market failure. People were putting up their CDs and movies, and then they were sharing them by various means. It changed over time, but it was kids in high school and college. College kids had it really good because they had great bandwidth,
Good.
right? The dorms had these great fast systems, and they were downloading stuff like crazy, which made the record industry and the movie industry go completely berserk and be kind of freaked out. But
I wasn't even thinking I would talk about this.
Right. So then what happened was they sued a bunch of people. But also eventually we got iTunes, we got Napster, we got Netflix, we got Amazon Prime, so that we didn't have to do that, Hulu. So that you can, and then in some way it's just easier, right? There was a process that was a little bit complicated with illegal downloading, and it got more complicated as time went on, and then easier, and then more complicated. And so it was just out of necessity that people were doing it in some way. Would you say?
Yes,
and sport.
I would say
there was a bit of sport, right?
It was a fun bonding activity for dorms to get together, and only one person would have done the illegal downloading or ripping.
Yeah.
And everybody else would just sort of clamor around and watch things or copy it to their computer, which is slightly different.
Yeah.
Although, legally, obviously, all kinds of problems. But, we would never touch the torrent sites. No, we trusted the guy who ran the X server.
Right, exactly. And so
while
all of this craziness was happening,
I was hand quilting.
You were the coolest kid on town. You were quilting by hand.
I was so nerdy.
That's so awesome. I like that.
But yeah, time really changed things up for me. That and, your hands as you get older. I mean, I'm only in my 30s, but, I can feel some of the changes that have happened already.
Yeah, in law school, we're having a ridiculous conversation today. Well, in law school, my mom did hand work too. We did cross stitch together, really complicated Danish cross stitch. And when I was in law school, I had this, we always called them masterpieces. So I had this big masterpiece I was working on, and instead of studying, when I hated to study for a particular class, I would cross stitch, and then my paws, I'd call my paws would get so messed up that my husband would have to like massage them, because I'd be like, my paws hurt too much. He's like, it's time to, you gotta go study now. It's time to study, because you can't cross stitch anymore. So yeah, I understand. That was in my it is what it is.
The tenure track now helps me. I have to do a certain amount of writing, which is kind of a good break for, you can't
quilt all the time
every night.
That's right.
All the time.
Exactly.
So I can maybe do a little of each.
So what are you on the tenure track for, in case people don't know?
I am a librarian at the Penn State Libraries, and Penn State Libraries are one of the groups of librarians where there's an actual full tenure process, sort of not completely like other faculty because we don't necessarily do teaching, but I'm expected to do research.
Yeah.
And essentially by the 6th year, I'm expected to be a national leader in the field on some front.
Yes, I know that feeling. Are you a national expert on X?
I am already, actually. It was very exciting.
Right.
I figured something out. So I'm like, I have years to go, but my tenure mentor said, oh, you're fine. You're already doing this thing.
What year are you in?
2.
You got a long time. What are you a national expert on?
Oh, gosh. Either archival linked data or labor in archives and certain library contexts.
Lovely. That's great. See,
the second is sort of my passion. And the first is my area of expertise.
The second one is your passion. Labor
is
your passion. Labor, like people working in archives?
Like asking questions about the kinds of jobs that we create and about how we are treating the people that we put in certain jobs, the rise of term positions. I mean, it probably helped that I was married to an underemployed adjuncting PhD for, years. I mean, I'm still married to him. He just teaches high school now. So
that happens a lot, right? It's not really fair.
It does.
It's really unfair.
And so in the library side, I'm asking how we can at least where we can create standards and where we can say if we are creating a temporary position, how are we going to treat the person? Are we going to give them a full-time job at least? Are we going to ensure that they get healthcare and benefits? Yeah. Are we going to commit to the kinds of work that we ask from them that they can then use to build a portfolio to help them get a full-time job? That kind of thing.
Love it. I think that's really important. That's great work, because we're going more and more to adjuncts, and it's not fair. And it's really brutal, and it's cruel. You know,
it really is.
It's not cool. I totally agree.
No, and I watched how it affected my husband for years. And so now that I actually have some standing to influence some kinds of decisions, I'm trying to at least in libraries see what we can do, and then try to set standards that we hope can be adopted by other people, just as we're looking outside of libraries for other people working on this. You know, our grad students are trying to unionize.
The grad students unionized at UCLA when I was a grad student. I was on the picket line. I wasn't very good on the picket line, but I was there. Unionizing, because part of the problem is, and we're not talking about quilting, part of the problem and the reason that there's a need for unionization, particularly for grad students, is that they're transient. So like nobody stays around, so that there's a kind of brutality to the system, because they know that you guys everyone's going to graduate out, right? And so that's a problem, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was weird. It was interesting, but yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, well, the Temple grad students have unionized, and now it's spreading up here, which is great. And Chicago, I think, just voted in a union.
It's really interesting. Okay, well, that's not anything about quilting at all. No. So you had a great comment on JustWannaQuilt that said, like, once I get tenure, like my quilting, like my more quilting, less,
Yeah,
totally. There, I'm now a full professor, so I'm like all about the quilt. So Ruth, I'm mentoring you, right? Like, quilting. And so there are some really interesting topics that we should think about for libraries and quilting, because I think there's some really interesting areas that need to be explored.
I have some ideas
and all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
I have some ideas too for how I'm a technology type librarian, but I am always techno-skeptical in a lot of ways. Sometimes I'm a bit of a Luddite, but I think that it would be very interesting, for example, to work with 3D printing and introduce it to people with visual and other sensory disabilities, or who perceive the world in other sorts of ways. So I'm thinking also potentially people with autism or other things that change, sensory experiences.
3D printing a quilt?
Well, quilt block, I think. So consider how if I'm trying to share with one of my friends who is blind the block pattern that I'm making.
Yeah.
How can I share what the layout of those pieces looks like? And I think that it wouldn't be quite as simple as 3D printing some seams. Obviously, you could starch seams and share the fabric and the touch textiles, but like, what would it look like to create an all-around experience where you combine fabric type things, some of them stiffened so that you can trace the patterns, some of them quilted so that you can feel what that feels like, and then some things that help you understand like what the shape is actually supposed to be like.
That's really
in cool. a way that maybe a quilt exhibit doesn't let you do, because in a quilt exhibit
like
you can't
sensory
touch.
Quilt experience that you can understand the quilt by just merely touching it, kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's a thing. It's the kind of thing that I'd like to do as like a future research project, once I get my other stuff done, dive into that kind of thing.
That's really cool. All right. I like that. That sounds really interesting, and very interesting to think through sort of all of those things. That's really interesting. It's super cool. Okay. Hold on. Let me get to my list. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So your quilting life, how in your very busy capacity of having to write and have a full-time job and, do living things, when do you quilt?
So, pretty much in the evenings, I either break my evening down for, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea and write. I'm going to make myself a cup of tea and read, generally scholarly articles, sometimes for fun. Or I'm going to put on some podcasts. I'm going to put on some audiobooks and come up here to my quilting room.
Would it be the Just Wanna Quilt podcast? No, I'm just kidding.
I have added you to my roster. It's good.
Awesome.
I've gotten backlogs of some people, so I need to catch up.
Cool.
So then I come up here, and so I don't have quite as much time to quilt as I want to. And part of what I've been doing then is working on making smaller quilts. So like I think I put a picture of this one in the
Let me see.
thing.
I like that one.
banged this quilt out in the weekend.
So Cheryl Sloboda says small quilts rock. So we should like be making small quilts. If we make a bunch of small quilts, then we could have like a small quilt exhibition in some way. It'd be really cool.
Yeah. And I think